Hey guys, just a reminder, this is not official medical advice. For such, please seek an appointment with a licensed medical provider.
Welcome back, everybody, to Performance Medicine TV. This is another episode of Dive Into Diet with nutrition coach Lucas Schmidt. Lucas, you're over in Johnson City today. Are you staying warm?
More or less. It's a little drafty.
A little drafty.
The weather is cold.
Well, man, thank you for hopping on with me today. We got a really interesting episode. You shot me a text this morning wanting to talk about, different, terms along the lines of low carb and keto and what's the difference. Kind of explain what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I'm just going to differentiate low carb versus keto versus, I guess, no carb, which is really rare that people ever try that. Before I jump into that, why would somebody choose to eat this way? I'm going to answer that question first, just so there's sort of a point to any of it. Generally, people opt for these eating patterns for weight loss because they seem to work pretty well for weight loss. There's a lot of explanations, and if you go to you could probably go on YouTube and find a lot of keto channels and low carb channels, and they'll give you all these really cool chemical reasons why they theorize that the diet is superior to all others. I think the answer is actually a little bit more general in that I think it's easier to calorically restrict yourself on these diets than it is the other ones. I'm not saying that there aren't benefits like in your brain from keto. A lot of people claim that they derive focus benefits, energy stability benefits, all those things. Not saying that's not true, or we know keto was developed therapeutically in certain settings for epilepsy. So yeah, there's some brain related, but for weight loss and general health, it's a lot harder to eat junk food in a low carb or keto diet most of the time. Not saying there's not junk food that's keto friendly, but it's usually very expensive or doesn't taste very good. And if you're going to make it yourself, it's pretty challenging. So like baked keto junk. So people tend to lose weight on these types of eating patterns just because they don't have. It's kind of a black and white thinking, so it's there's not a lot of nuance, so it's really hard to cheat. And so the rules are very clear generally. Low carb's a little more vague, and we'll talk about that's why I want to differentiate them. But like keto is you're under 50 to 20 carbs a day, no more than that for any, and if you do, you're out. It's a light switch off and on. So people tend to be able to stick to that pretty easily. A lot of the food that's available is still pretty tasty, but it's also very filling and heavy, fatty protein food. So that's why I think people tend to lose weight on these diets. Is it's harder to eat junk food, and So now let me go into the differences. Let's start with low carb. It's the most general. It's not very specific. My idea of low carb would be, I'm going to give a number. I would say 120 carbs and under would be considered low carb. Now, some people might say, no, that's not very low. That's a lot of carbs. Not really, not compared to the standard American diet or even some other healthy diets. There's a lot of carbs in those diets. So low carb to me is 120 and under. And a healthy low carb would be getting your carbs from like fruits and vegetables, maybe a little dairy. So and not, pastries, which I really wish pastries were good for us.
I love
It's probably
pastries.
My favorite baked item overall is like puff pastry crust of anything. Savory, sweet, doesn't matter. So that's sort of low carb's pretty general. I would say a person who wants to err on the safe side and is going to do low carb would maybe aim for like 80 carbs. And try to stay around 80 a day. That's still pretty low. That's pretty low. You're not going to be keto. There could be exceptions out there. Everyone's threshold for ketogenic is different, but there's a range. I think 80 is fairly low carb.
So 80 is low carb, or is that keto?
That's not keto.
Okay.
Not for most people. if you're incredibly carb efficient or you're like a high performance athlete and you're burning everything, maybe on 80, but that's not everybody. Keto is generally 50 carbs and under.
Okay.
Now, 50 is on the higher end. Some keto folks would say that's too many carbs. You're not going to get keto. When I've done a keto diet, which is 3 times, I think, long term, I've done them before for 3 to 6 months, a year. I stuck under 50 and I was fine. I was in keto, but I exercise 4 days a week. Some of my other work is active.
Yeah.
So I probably could afford to have more. If you want to safely be in keto, you want 25 and under.
Oh.
So to give you an example, a standard apple has about 25 carbs in it. So now there's fiber there, and you subtract fiber from keto. It doesn't technically count. So you could probably eat an apple and not be kicked out of keto, but that's not a keto food. To properly do keto, people say, I can have an apple. Well, you could, but that uses up your entire quota of carbs for the day. And even keto-friendly food usually has 1 to 2 carbs per serving. So you got to be careful. You got to be mindful. With keto, it's pretty strict. We're talking 75% fat is what your diet is, and the rest is protein. And 70 to 75% fat. 20% protein, 5% carbs. So it's generally the rule of thumb.
Is that easy to follow? Is like, because the one knock with keto.
It is.
Is it really?
Yeah, because it's so black and white. For me, it is. It's a very strict diet, and that sounds hard, but I mean strict in an easy way.
Oh.
I don't have a list of things to memorize.
Right.
All I have to know is I can't have that. It has carbs in it.
Right.
I can't have that. It has carbs in it. Now, if you want to follow an optimal keto diet, it's a little harder because you have to eat clean. So that is avoiding the processed foods, because there's a lot of processed keto food now. Keto is a big market too. So there's a lot of like cookies and things like that are keto friendly and all this stuff. And I mean, I guess if you technically stay under it's still harder to overeat in keto, in my opinion, than it is in another diet, because the food is just so heavy. People tend, and I notice when I'm in keto, my hunger signals are weaker. I'm assuming that has to do with probably insulin, and the sugar and carbs spike blood sugar pretty quickly. They can make you feel hungry pretty quick after. Protein and fat don't raise your blood sugar very high. They do raise it. Anything you eat raises your blood sugar. That's normal. And the body takes that signal and sends out insulin. It's just, it doesn't go really high and then fall from the insulin. It just goes up like normal and then levels back out. That's sort of generally in keto, unless you have like a metabolic disorder. But so it's just, you're just less likely to scarf down a bunch of crap,
Well, and that's one thing, Lucas, that I've found about, even as I'm attempting to do the, a more no processed or less processed diet, this year. It just like trying. When you try, it automatically you eat better. Even if it's not perfect, it's like if you have some guidelines. I've found that I eat less just because I have to be more intentional. I can't just eat whatever's in front of me or
eating in boredom is a big problem for a lot of people. Well, that's actually one of my problems I've realized is I'll eat if I'm bored, I want to eat. But I notice when I'm on some sort of clean, quote unquote, clean eating, like right now, my eating for the next few months is, I'm being a little more loosey-goosey, but mostly just meats and fruits is what I'm sort of, I'm not going anti-vegetable. I just personally, if I eat certain amounts of fiber all at once, my intestines aren't too happy. So I've learned that with a lot of trial and error.
Have you found that when, for me, when this is odd, I apologize to any of our listeners if this is TMI, but when I've tried to eat more healthy, which means I've limited what I eat. I'm eating Greek yogurt and, berries and, meats. My bowel movements haven't been like as I feel like I'm still kind of figuring it out, or my body's trying to. But when I eat like a sandwich, or just sometimes I'll have a burger at night with bread. My bowel movements are like more used to that. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, when you change your eating pattern, your bowels have to adjust. So, I'm not a bowel doctor, a gastro doc, but you have a gut microbiome. Your small and large intestine have a lot of bacteria in them that live, and depending on what you're feeding them is going to affect how many of which type grow, how many that, how prevalent they are, and they kind of help govern how quickly or slowly things move through. Now, another thing to consider is if you're eating lower fiber foods like meat, for example, and Greek yogurts, there's no fiber in those foods.
I think that's what's happening. I think I'm not getting as much fiber.
Right, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. Animal foods in general, animal products like meat and dairy, have a really high absorption rate. So your body will more readily take that into the tissue. So it's like 93 to 100% absorption rate, which means less waste, so less poop. It's part of you, and that makes sense. You eat like a vegetable, you're eating the structure of the plant. There's a lot of cellulose, a lot of sort of structural proteins that our bodies are not ready to take. We don't produce enormous amounts of cellulase, which is an enzyme that breaks down cellulose. You can take cellulase; they make it in pill form, an enzyme, but we're not biologically ready to just absorb every part of the plant. Okay, which is what basically fiber is, just that, the thing you don't absorb. And the reasons that people say it's very healthy, and I'm not here to say it is or isn't, is because that helps ferment, which is bacterial growth, fermentation in your gut, good, healthy bacteria. They like it. We can't digest the fiber, but they can. And so they grow off of that. And then what they don't eat, that it gets pushed through in the form of poop. So
that's
interesting. If you're eating less fiber, you're not going to have as much poop. Now, the question would be am I bloated and in pain all the time and not pooping? Or am I just pooping less often, but I have no other symptoms? My blood work's good, blah, 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 blah. If the answer is the second one, I wouldn't worry so much. But if you're not going to the bathroom and you're in pain and you're sort of distended and you're, something's wrong. That's a bodily signal. The intestines are incredibly sensitive, especially to pressure change. So, there's people will go to the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack because they've got gas.
That's so interesting.
Like gas pain and pressure change can be quite painful. So that's a bit of it. I took us on a tangent there, but the last part I wanted to say, because we mentioned no carb, the only no carb diet I can think of is like a carnivore diet.
I was going to ask,
and that's like a dairy-free carnivore diet. Well, there's not fiber in dairy, but sometimes you can get some yogurts, for example, they're even lower. They're low sugar yogurts, but there's usually a little fiber added to them. Chicory root usually is what they add. So that's a little cap. But plain dairy, that has carbs in it, right? Plain yogurt has about 4. It's low. So if you're going to go no carb, that's a carnivore diet, which the only dairy those people usually consume is like butter, and there's no carbs in butter, or ghee, which is even more pure. It's pure clarified butter. So, and that's meat. That's it. Meat, eggs, and maybe ghee, maybe. And that's a no carb diet, virtually none. So there might be trace carbs in certain organ meats, but it's minimal. So that's a niche category that's rare. Most people aren't doing that diet. I'm not bashing it or praising it. I'm just saying it's just not common. And talk about hard to cheat on that diet. People lose weight on carnivore because it's even more restrictive than keto, which is hard enough to eat junk food in. Carnivore, there is no junk food.
Is there, if you're going carnivore, I'm assuming, and this is probably a dumb question, I'm assuming that means you can't eat deli meat, like because it's processed, or can you, if you're a carnivore, could you have
you
like
could
turkey?
try. If you're a purist in carnivore, the preservatives and there's usually plant derivatives in the deli meat. So like some kind of seasoning. Carnivore diet excludes all seasonings except for salt.
Wow.
No spices, no pepper, nothing. Most deli meat has some form of black pepper in it, or like a Italian herb. There's like a little hint of something. Now you can get it season free, but it's still injected with a bunch of stuff. So yeah, carnivore is real, true carnivore diet. No coffee, no tea, is very restrictive. It's water, salt, meat, eggs, maybe organs, fish. You can eat any kind of meat, but you can't. And if you're eating bacon, it needs to be pork belly, which is before it's been treated, before it's been cured, or anything like that. So you can overeat on any diet, but the odds are so low on a carnivore diet because you have to prepare all the food, and again, it's meat, it's heavy, it's filling, Now, those of you out there who try these diets, keto, for example, you say, you never feel hungry. You will feel starving in the first 2 weeks. And that's because you're adjusting to the diet. When you're actually fully into the diet, you won't feel as hungry. Normally, I don't. You will feel starving in the first 2 weeks because you are depleting your stored glycogen in your muscle tissue. So to get into a ketogenic state, this is for keto or carnivore, not low carb. Keto or carnivore people, they go through the adaptation period, which is about a week to 2 weeks, and you feel starving all the time. And that's because your body is signaling to you, hey, my glycogen stores, which is sugar in the muscle, is gone. I've burned through them and I'm not replenishing them. Yeah. So you essentially have a withdrawal.
Yep. And
a withdrawal is a strong craving. I remember anytime I do keto, the first 2 weeks, I'll sit down and I could eat 8 to 16 ounces of steak. Okay. I would still be starving afterwards. Now that's not because I didn't eat enough. It's because my body didn't get any sugar. And so my glycogen stores, it's like, give me more. I need that sugar. And after a few days of that uncomfortable hunger, it's like hunger down to your bones. Like I feel it in my hands when I'm hungry. Like it's so deep. Once you get through that, your body says, he's not getting the message. So let's switch to auxiliary heat mode essentially and burn fat for fuel. And once that happens, you feel fine. Then it's like sort of the opposite. You're like, I guess I should eat. I don't know. What time is it? And sort of this. And that's nice. It's metabolic flexibility in the sense that you're not sort of tethered to the clock. I find when I eat a lot of carbs, I'm tethered to the clock. It's like if I go out, or if I go to work, or if I go to do an event, I am always thinking about food before the event. I'm like, what am I going to eat? And where am I getting food? Because I'm going to be hungry during this time. Whereas in keto, you're kind of like, well, I ate about 2 hours ago. I'm not really that hungry now. Yeah, I could go 6 more. You just kind of flexible, which is nice. Yeah. The downside for keto for me, I can just be honest and transparent, is at least for the first 2 to 3 months, you do further adapt the longer you're in it. But I find my gym performance suffers.
Interesting. On keto?
Yes. No, I mean, for the first few months. Now, some people go, well, I wasn't going to be in it longer than 3 months. And that's fine. I'm just like to be honest about that. The weights, I wasn't lifting less weight. I didn't lose strength. I guess it depends on how you define that. Everything felt heavier. So I could maybe still get to X amount of pull-ups, but it just felt that much harder. It was just like, God. After one pull-up, I'm like, oh, geez, I don't think I can. This is going to be rough. And you still do it, but it's sort of a miserable experience. So that was, and I'm sure there's some protocol. Making sure you're high on your electrolytes is one thing, but low carb you don't really run into that because you're still taking in carbs. You're not dropping below the threshold where your glycogen disappears. So that's
and real quick, Lucas. I heard two numbers with low carb. I heard 120 and 80.
That would be the range I would offer.
Okay,
Yeah.
So under 120 or under
120 maximum.
And then
if you want to go on the
80.
lower end, 80.
Okay, and then keto's 50.
Keto, if you're exercise, this is my rule. I'm being, if you're exercising and you already are fairly lean, 50 and under is fine. But if you've never done keto, you're not really an exerciser, you need to go under 25.
Okay.
So that's sort of my approach.
All right. Lucas, is there
and zero
else?
carb is easy. It's zero.
Is there anything else? I'm seeing here low carb, keto, and no carb, which is carnivore. Is there any other way to go no carb besides carnivore?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, what would you eat?
I mean, you would probably die of malnourishment or like horrific stomach gas because there are plant foods that have almost no carbs. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what those are. There's a type of mushroom that's like pure fiber. Fiber is technically a carb, but you're not absorbing it. So I'm going to go, I'm going to split the hair there. But if you only ate fiber, you would starve because you can't absorb it all. Like, you would die. So no. If somebody out there knows of one, people say, well, avocados. Well, avocados still have carbs in them. You know what? I did think of it. Just pure olive oil.
And that's all you eat?
Yeah, but you'd still starve because you're still missing out on protein and vital nutrients. Olive oil is pure fat, but it's plant fat and there are no carbs in it. But you're gonna I bet you'd live longer than you think. But you would start to suffer some deficiencies, protein primarily. So I don't advise that. That is not a diet I would follow.
No.
The other no carb diet that's non-carnivore is no food at all, starvation.
And there we go.
Hey, that's free. You don't have to pay for anything.
And
before long, all your troubles are over. All your diseases are cured. And I am saying that in case somebody hears that and thinks, "Oh, great, it's not a cure for disease; it kills you." So that's why you're technically cured because viruses don't want to live in the dead. So. And
there we go.
On that morbid note.
Yeah. This is a cool episode. And again, that last part, guys, is not advice.
That is not advice. That's a warning. Don't starve.
Lucas, man,
it's a bad idea.
I appreciate the time today. Is that a podcast?
I think so.
That's a podcast. All right. As always, guys, we will see y'all next time.
Don't go away.